guys, thanks for being part of session 10. This is our last session for our Choosing Joy series as we've looked the last few weeks through the book of Philippians. Man, what an incredible time it has been. I want to jump right into the conversation today. Have you guys ever had that time or season in your life, or maybe this is an ongoing thing for you, where you find this nagging in your heart, in your gut, in your soul, where you're always trying to look for the next best thing. You're always trying to find contentment and fulfillment in what can I get. You're always running after stuff. I know I find myself at times where I'm like, man, if I can get that thing, then, man, that'll be enjoyable. That'll be good. That'll bring me some joy into my life. And then I get that thing, and I find myself running after it and spending a lot of my mental time, my energy, my effort after this thing that really doesn't matter, but I've convinced myself that it's going to bring contentment and joy in my life, and I get it, and then it becomes old really quick.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, this isn't all that I thought it would be. You know, I think if we're honest with ourselves, so much of our time and energy is spent on things of this world. We're running after the stuff, and it's empty. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be driven. I think you should be driven. I think you should become the best you can be at whatever it is you do, because I think you can honor God through that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful or wanting a pay raise. Those are good things. They're not bad. But those things, too, can become our God.
Yes.
Right.
You know, and we can run after these things. You made the statement the other day that the main focus of somebody in the world of marketing is to make you believe
Right.
that you're not fully satisfied or who you need to be without this product.
Yeah, every commercial that you see, you know, in advertising, their job is to make you feel like this product has value and that your life is not going to be complete without that value that this product can bring. And so if you watch movies, if you watch TV, whatever it is, Hollywood's job and marketing agency's job and advertising's job, their job is to convince you that you're not happy the way you are and that you're not content the way you are, and that only by getting this thing will you find happiness and contentment. And, you know, we know obviously that there's really only one thing that's going to bring that lasting happiness and contentment, and that's Jesus, you know. But yeah, man, I mean, everywhere you look in the world, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell you happiness, sell you contentment, sell you value.
Yeah, and I think the slippery slope there for all of us is that we could end up falling into this trap of spending our lives and our time running after all this stuff. And then we get to the end and we have a bunch of stuff, but our hands are empty. Our heart's not full.
That's right.
You know, we've lost the most important things along the way, maybe our family, maybe our this, maybe that, whatever, for something that we thought was going to really bring it home for us, and it didn't even matter.
Yeah, that lack of contentment is at every stage of life. Like, you think about a toddler, like, man, if I could just get that blow pop, life is amazing.
That's
You
right.
know what I mean?
Lollipop, what it's called.
Lollipop. Yeah, if I could just get that sucker. It's like taking a kid through the drive-through at the bank. You know, they're going to get a piece of candy. So when you go to the bank, you're going to get
Although,
that.
Kenny, as your little girl gets older, you'll understand you can use that for manipulation. It works great.
But it never stops. You know, it's like, as a kid wants a blow pop, then it's like, man, if I could just get to middle school, and then, oh man, at high school,
I could just get a car.
When I get a car and I get to college, life's gonna be amazing. Then it's like, man, I got to get a job. This is going to be awesome.
I'm going to have money.
Yeah, money.
I'm gonna make
getting
my own
married.
decisions.
But what's funny is, like, every stage of life, like, there's always something. And then people hit their 40s, like, midlife crisis. They want to revert back and be 20 again. But, like, we're always seeking something else that we don't have.
That's right.
You know, and it's every age of life.
Yeah, and I even think in the challenging times, being able to have this sense of contentment is really important, because when difficulties come, oftentimes that's too when we run after those things. We think, my life is bad right now, things aren't going the way, I must need, you know, most affairs, for example, they start out of a lack of contentment in their mate, and they go, well, he's not making me happy, she's not making me happy, they're not giving me what I want, I'm gonna have to run somewhere else, rather than going, you know what? What's really going to bring life is for us to deal with the challenges. Let's just deal with what's going on. And it really leads to a lot of bad decisions. So I just want you to think right now, as you're listening to us have this conversation, what are you spending your emotional, mental, physical energy on? I mean, where are your thoughts? Where is your life? What are you pursuing? What is really the thing that you're running after? As Paul writes and finishes the letter to the church in Philippi. He writes this. He says in verse 10 through 13, and then I'm going to read verse 18 through 19 in chapter 4. He says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Now he's talking about, hey, you guys forgot about me, but I'm thankful that you have remembered me again. He says, indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. Man, I'm so grateful that you guys are showing me your love again. He says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstance. Wow, what a powerful thing. I mean, the guy's in prison. That's just terrible. In verse 12, he says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've been on the top, I've been in the bottom, I've experienced both. And then he goes on, he says, I have learned the secret of being content. I want to know what this is, because man, what is the secret? In any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And this is the famous verse 13. I can do all things through him, through Christ, who gives me strength. Such a powerful thing in verse 13. Now, we see that verse on every athletic Christian t-shirt,
Right. Yeah.
and it's
That's right.
I can score the touchdown. I can dunk the basketball because of Jesus. Okay, whatever. No, really what he's talking about here is he's talking about I can have this contentment that comes from God in any situation.
Right.
I don't need to find my fulfillment in all this stuff. Paul says, man, I've been on the top. I've had the things that many of you are running after that are consuming you, as you were describing, Kenny, at every phase of life. Paul had experienced that. He had been at the top of the religious food chain. I mean, he was a powerful guy. He'd been at the bottom where he'd been shipwrecked and beaten and now in prison. He'd been at the bottom. And he had learned to experience true contentment that comes from God in all those situations. Godly contentment, it produces joy. And that's why at the beginning of that little section of scripture, he says, I rejoice greatly in the Lord. He can have joy. He can rejoice because he had contentment.
Yeah. And what he's saying there is that Jesus can sustain him in any situation, in any circumstance. And that's I don't think we start there. I think that's, again, that relational process we talked about, kind of all through the series. But he has that kind of relationship where he can look to Christ in any situation, and God sustains him.
Yeah. Yeah, and we find Paul, he's been following Jesus for a good while now. So he's been on the journey, and life is this journey. It's the journey of relationship with God, relationship with others. It ebbs and flows, and it doesn't ebb and flow because God moves. We do. We're kind of dumb that way, But on the journey, we learn to trust God. We learn to have this contentment on the journey. And Paul's at this place where he says, man, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can overcome. I can have contentment. And this is the secret to contentment.
Yeah.
Is to focus on Jesus. And then he goes on, I'm kind of jumped to verse 18 and 19. He says, I have received full payment and have more than enough. I am amply supplied now that I have received from, that's an interesting word.
From either.
Yeah, from
Epaphroditus?
Epaphroditus, yeah. My great reading skills. The gifts you sent. So he's saying, man, I'm grateful for the gifts. I love this next part. He says, they are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. It's in the gifts that I've received, man, those gifts bring great fragrance as an offering. And he says, verse 19, and my God will meet all your needs according to this, the riches of his glory in Christ. It is through Christ. It goes back to the good news of Jesus that God's going to provide for you. He's going to give you what you need. He can bring contentment. It's not all this other stuff that we get so caught up in. It's not all the bad things. It's focusing our heart and mind on who Jesus is and what he's done. And we can have godly contentment through Christ, and that produces this sense of joy.
Yeah. I think Paul recognized the source of his strength. I used this illustration before with students, but they, we don't go far with this little white cord to connect to our phone, because we know that when that thing dies and it hits 10%, we start freaking out, panic mode. And the same thing, like Paul understood John 15, he understood what it meant to abide, and he knew that his true.
They connected to the
he knew what it meant to abide in Christ, because he knew where the source of his strength came from, and so he recognized that I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Like, he knew that, and so it's a simple illustration, but it's so true. Like, we don't get far from the wall plug because we don't want our phone to die, but we're so easy to neglect the true source that gives us life.
Yeah. So closes with this idea, like, man, if you truly want to be content in your life, you stay close to Jesus, as close as you can to where the power comes from.
That's right. We don't want to keep chasing after all these things that the world tells us is what, hey, if you just buy this, you'll be happy. If you'll just get this, you'll be happy. Instead, we have to realize the only thing that's going to make us content and happy and really fulfill long term is Jesus. That's it.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a multimillionaire, and he and I were having a conversation about this very thing. And, he made the statement, he knows tons of people that have so much money. They have everything that all of us think we want.
Right.
And yet they're miserable. There's no contentment. There's no joy. And all those things fade away.
That's right.
But the one thing that doesn't fade that doesn't end is our souls. And that's a weighty thing. And our souls will either end up with God through Christ or eternally separated from him. And we as the children of God, we can overcome all these things because of his strength that is in us. And man, our hope for you and our encouragement to you in each group is that you would stay close to the power source. I loved Kenny's illustration. Don't move far from that. Of course, iPhone makes the cord this long. They make sure you don't get too far away. And I think that's a great visual for us to stay close to him. He loves you. He cares for you. Thank you guys for being part of a life group.